Thanks for joining me on our lecture of one of the 4 P's of the labor process, the passage. The passage refers to the bony pelvis and the soft structures that the baby must travel through in order to be delivered vaginally. The baby enters the true pelvis at the pelvic inlet, with the head entering in a transverse position. As the baby moves down through the pelvis, the baby's head rotates such that the smallest diameter of the head goes through the largest diameter of the pelvis. The baby proceeds through the mid-pelvis, and then the head rotates in an anterior-posterior position to move through the pelvic outlet. Okay, let's take a look at how the fetus navigates through the pelvic structures. The fetus enters the pelvic inlet in the transverse position, then rotates through the mid-pelvis in an oblique fashion, and then to exit out of the pelvic outlet, the head goes into an anterior-posterior position. After the head is delivered, the body then externally rotates so that the shoulders can be delivered. After the shoulders are delivered, the baby slips out and has been born. Another aspect of the pelvis is its shape. Certain shapes are more conducive to a vaginal delivery, with the gynecoid pelvis being the best shape and fortunately more typical for females. Certain types of pelvis, such as the android, are almost impossible for a baby's head to fit through. Of course, the exact type of the pelvis that a woman has is unknown, so you don't really know if it is adequate for a vaginal delivery. The only way to determine the shape is by X-ray, and pelvic X-rays are never done in pregnancy. Once a woman has delivered vaginally, the pelvis has been proven to be adequate, and she is more likely to have future vaginal deliveries. Besides navigating and rotating through the pelvis, the baby must make it through the soft tissues. Certain things, like intact membranes, have been keeping the baby higher up in the uterus during pregnancy. As labor starts, the baby is pushed down into the lower uterine segment, and the head or the presenting part pushes against the cervix. Certain changes need to occur in the cervix in order for the baby to exit the uterus. I'll be talking more about that in a moment. Once the fetus gets through the cervix, it then progresses through the vagina, and the presenting part, usually the head, appears at the vaginal opening called the introitus. Once the baby's entire body passes through the introitus, birth has occurred. Under normal conditions, the cervix, which is the opening into the uterus, is closed. During menstruation, the cervix dilates ever so slightly, about the size of a Q-tip, in order to pass the menstrual blood. The cervix is normally about 1 inch in thickness. As the baby's head is pushed down into the lower uterine segment by the contractions, it pushes on the cervix and starts to thin out the cervix. So it goes from about 1 inch in thickness to paper thin. This process of thinning out the cervix is called effacement. If the cervix is not thinned out at all, it is called zero effaced. If it is about a half inch, then it is called 50% effaced. When the cervix is completely effaced, it is paper thin and also called 100% effaced. So in describing effacement, the nurse feels how much of the cervix has disappeared, with the goal being all of it has been thinned out. The baby's head pushing on the cervix also helps the cervix to open up or to dilate. Remember that the cervix is usually closed, so in order for the baby to be delivered vaginally, the cervix must dilate completely. A completely dilated cervix is 10 centimeters in diameter. This is also referred to as being complete. The nurse measures the cervical opening by inserting the index and middle finger of the dominant hand into the vagina and then locating the cervix with the 2 fingers. Once the cervix has been identified, the nurse then measures the opening of the cervix. This is why it is important for the nurse to measure the width of the tips of her fingers and also to be able to estimate the distance between the index and middle fingers when they are stretched out to reach both sides of the cervix. It is best for you to learn to estimate cervical dilatation by practicing with the cervical models in the skills lab. So please plan on going to the lab to practice this. Okay, let's see what that looks like in action. Here the fetal head is still inside the uterus and the cervix has begun to dilate in the face. The nurse might say the cervix is 2 centimeters dilated and 50% effaced. As the baby's head is pushed down onto the cervix by the strong fundal uterine contractions, it helps to thin out or efface the cervix, and the cervix opens as a direct effect of the uterine contractions. Once the cervix is completely dilated and paper thin, the fetal head begins to descend through the cervix. Moving through the pelvis and vagina occurs naturally with the contractions and with the mother pushing the baby out of the vagina. So today you have learned all about the passage or pelvis. There are 3 more P's to learn about, and they are essential to understand if you want to fully comprehend the birthing process. Although I focus solely on one aspect, in true labor, all the P's are working together and affecting one another. Be sure to go to the next video to learn more about the exciting concept of a vaginal birth.